So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you are watching our video for this first semester. So, I hope you are keeping well and staying safe. If you notice that there are some sounds going about the environment I am in, so I would like to ask your pardon simply because these are the circumstances we find ourselves in. And if we, whenever we have to meet during our classes, do note that it won't be any better. So that is why I opted instead to have this pre-recorded videos, and from time to time I will post it because I understand that not all of you have a stable internet connection or data connection. So this is how we'll do it. Okay, so we don't have to always meet, but at least all you need to do is check the Google Classroom and see what are the updates for our class. Okay, so without further ado, let us get into our first discussion. Alright, so if you are watching this now, please comment below your name, and that will serve as that will show me who is taking part. Okay, so when we think of philosophy, we have to wonder, or what, regardless of anything, no, whether it's a new subject, whether it's something that's new to you, we never really understand a certain concept by just being there, right? So you can't just assume that you know something, or you can't assume that you're not willing to learn, because at the end of the day, when people or some circumstances find you trying to understand a concept, you always have to understand what it is. Okay, so regardless of your course, you're going to have to end up giving a definition to what it is you're doing, or what it is you plan to do with your life, which is why you chose the course you have. All right, so when we ask what is philosophy, we often assume that it's about certain things that you don't want to concern yourself with. Kung sa Bisaya pa, na yung mga butang na dili yung ginahan studyhan, simply because you assume or you feel that dili siya makatabang sa imuha, which is not entirely true. But I'm not simply saying it is because it's my bias, but someone who has a philo degree. But it's not the degree or the piece of paper after your graduation that tells you who you are. Alright? So same thing, the same thing goes with how you see yourself, how you understand your part in your existence, and the question as to why you are here in the first place. Okay? At the end of the day, none of us chose to be alive, none of us chose to come into the world, and yet we are the result of the actions of our parents. And by some twist of fate, you're the one who is here now, right? So philosophy is basically trying to understand the existence of certain principles, the existence of certain realities that are existing in the world, such as the existence or the reality that you are alive. Okay, but before we delve into those theories, we have to understand what philosophy is first. Okay? So philosophy is not just about asking questions that you think are stupid, or it's not simply the questioning of certain actions or principles just for the sake of questioning it. Because first and foremost, philosophy is what we call the concept or the discipline that wants you to understand what is real, what is necessary, what makes people human, what makes you human, what differentiates a person who is a law-abiding citizen to a person who is humane. Okay, so before we delve into those other very complicated concepts of life, we have to understand what is philosophy. Okay, so of course, before we start anything, we have to have a definition. Okay, there is always a need for a definition. like in every course, as you read here now, like in every course, before we come to understand what we are getting into, we have to understand what it is, where it begins and where it ends. Okay, so like take for example, if you are a criminology major, then aha mo sugod ang imong pagka-crim, aha mo punong, di ba? So kung musulod ka sa school or when you become a professional, you have to understand what it is you are trying to learn. Unsay end goal nimo pag human nimo pili sa imong kurso. Okay? So if you are a criminology major, then it begins by stating that I want to uphold the law. Simple as that. So that, diba? So the definition for a criminologist is someone who studies criminal behavior and law in order to become someone who upholds the law. Right? And where does that end? Ahana mo no. It ends when it goes beyond your field of expertise. Tama ba? Okay? So, malamang a criminology major cannot answer the questions of a nursing major. Likewise, the nursing student cannot answer the questions for the criminology major, right? But the thing about philosophy is that it is not dependent on the degree you have, because philosophy is not just for someone who has a philosophy degree. Alright? Because philosophy is for everyone. Okay? The reason why you have a work ethic, the reason why you work hard, is simply because you have a philosophy that drives you to work hard. Likewise, if you are lazy or if you are happy-go-lucky, then you believe in a philosophy that allows you to believe that you should take things easy. Okay? So philosophy is not just merely a course, it is not merely a subject, it is actually a way of life. Kaya dili naman siya basta-basta na gayon ka philosophy na ani, philosophy na ana, then pati na diri sa Pinas kay ang word na pilosopo kay negative kaayo paminawon. So we often think no na ang pagka-pilosopo kay negative or pati kay usahay manggod ang atong una-una sa pilosopo kay sarcastic. Okay? One example is si Vice Ganda. We call him filosopo, pero that is not philosophy. Sarcastic lang yun siya, di ba? Lahi ang pagka-sarcastic, lahi ang pagka-tinuod na filosopo, right? So we have in our search for a definition, of course, there are definitions that are different. Okay, first and foremost, we have what we call a nominal definition. Okay, so a nominal definition seeks to understand a certain context by virtue of the origin of its name. Okay. Excuse me. So if you didn't get that, you can read it again. But the mere fact here, from the word nominal or from the word nomine, which is Latin for name, we look at the name and see for it ourselves where we get to understand the origin of the thing that exists, right? So when we say, for example, biology, okay, what is the name or origin of the word biology? So bio comes from Latin, which means life. Logic comes from the Greek word logos, which means to study. Okay, so then we have the word the study of life, diba? Biology. So that's what my nominal definition. You look at the name, the origin of the name, and then you get an idea of what the purpose of this concept is. Okay, so for philosophy, we actually have as the similar notion of a nominal definition. Philosophy comes from two Greek words. Okay, so the philosophy comes from two Greek words, which are philia and sophia. Okay, philia is a love between and among friends. Sophia is wisdom. Therefore, philo plus sophia, which is philosophy, simply means the love of wisdom. Alright, so we have to consider also that since these are Greek words, there is embedded in it Greek culture, ang kultura sa mga Greko. So philia is just one of the 6 forms of love. Okay, so there are actually 6 forms of love in the concept of ancient Greece, which are eros, philia, agape, storge, and so on and so forth. All of these are different forms of love. Okay, For example, eros, which we derive the word erotic, eros means love between lovers. Okay? Agape is a love that encompasses all kinds of love. And usually the greatest example for the Greek concept of agape is a certain historical figure named Jesus Christ. Okay? Agape. So he sacrificed himself out of love. Alright? Next. Philia is actually what the love between your friends. The love you have for your barkada. Okay? So when we say love of wisdom, it is not the erotic love that you have, but it is a friendly kind of love. The love that makes you love and hate the person at the same time. Diba? When you have a friend, there are some yes, you have a when you have a friend, there are some there are behaviors in which you accept him or her, or then there are some they have also have some behaviors that are what you find irritating. So, diba, as you treat wisdom as a friend, then only then will you be able to appreciate the meaning of life. Okay? Pardon the last part, wisdom is not spelled with. Okay? So, love of wisdom, that is the nominal definition. So, of course, the Greeks weren't the only ones who had their philosophy. There are also, actually philosophy is not, how do you say this? Philosophy is not under the monopoly of one culture. Every culture has its own philosophy, just like every individual lives by their own philosophy, and this we call principles. Okay? So by our principles, we have our philosophy of life. And because this is something we abide to, mga ginasunod nato, we simply follow this because mauniga make sense sa tuwa. Okay? So, yun, before we get into that, this is what we call the nominal definition. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. Okay? So, of course, aside from that, we also have to look at professional definitions because nominal definitions only go so far. Okay? So, according to the Oxford definition, first and foremost, the first bullet we have here, it is the study of the most general and abstract features of the world and categories with which we think, mind, matter, reason, truth, etc. So, to put it in a more scholarly matter, no? Okay? So, philosophy is actually we try to study things that are complex or abstract. So when we say abstract, these are things that we cannot touch. Mga butang na dili na to masabtan by simply looking at it. Mga butang na dili lang ta basta-basta maka-judge na mauna ni siya kung dili na to basahon or tanawon og maayo. Okay? So these are the things that we categorize as atong mind, mga matter, mga reason, mga proof, kung si tinuod o sa kabana. Alright? So the second definition is, in philosophy, the concepts with which we approach the world themselves become the topic of inquiry. So kung giyon sa nato pagpangutan na bahin sa kalibutan, mo na ang pag-philosophy. Okay? So the reason why you ask, ano mo eskwela pa man ko? Ano mo trabaho pa man ko? These are actually these are not just about practical questions, no? But these are also philosophical questions that do not really get an answer immediately. Alright? So what does this mean? It means that the moment you try to make sense of life, why do you feel this way about a certain person? How come I do not like my teacher? How come I do not want to study? Or why does the government have to demand that we have classes even if it's pandemic? So these are questions that allow us to search for the truth. Muna mga pangutana na makapaningkamot tagpangita sa kamatuoran. Okay? So ngano kinahanglan ni buhaton? Ngano kinahanglan man buhaton? Unsay sense na buhaton pa ninako? Okay? So with that, we have also another definition. Diba? So we are siguro love of wisdom could have been enough, pero of course as people who engage in the concept of philosophy, we should not be content with what is there. Okay? Because even if there is something in front of you, there is more to that thing than what you see. Okay, so I don't see you now because this is just a video, but behind this screen there are people, there are students, there are people who are trying to finish their studies. But this, even though that is the reality that I see, na kamo estudyante mo na gusto lang mo mahumani siya para lang makagraduate mo, there is more to you than my own assumptions. There is more to you than how I see you. Okay? Because even though I see you as students, you are more than students. Okay? Even if you are, even if you believe that this subject is worthless, I know that deep inside, you are your own philosopher, even if you are not aware of it. Okay? So, whether you're lazy, whether you're hardworking, it doesn't. In the face of philosophy, you yourself give value to the concept of philosophy simply because you exist. Tungod kay kahuna-huna ka, you are already adding to the principles of philosophy. Alright? So, that is why we have to understand even more kung saang definition sa philosophy. Okay? Because, just since this is also dependent sa tao, kita mismo gadungag sa kaayuhan sa kalibutan. And we add to the goodness of the world by engaging in our philosophical questioning. Okay? So the next definition is what we call, there's still another Oxford definition, sorry, I forgot about. So a philosophy of a discipline such as history, physics, or law seeks not so much historical, physical, or legal questions as to study the concepts that structure such thinking and to lay bare their foundations and presuppositions. Okay, so so ang philosophy as a discipline, okay, so dili siya pareha sa disiplina sa uban na butang, okay, kaya it doesn't question unsay basis or dili man sa basis no, dili siya gapangita sa historical or sa legal na question bahin sa usa ka butang. Rather, ang gitanaw sa philosophy kung ahagikan ang paghuna-huna ani nga butang. Okay? Like let's say for example, the death penalty bill of 2018, a philosopher would look at this bill and will not immediately judge if it's right or wrong. Okay? Ang iyang tan-awon kay ang unsay reason nga napabalikon pa man siya. Kung valid ba ang reason, kung sakto ba ang foundations nga nung gihatag ni siya, o kung unsay assumption na mahitabo kung mapasa ni siya na bill. Okay? That's basically the understanding of philosophy when it comes to ridiculing other concepts. Okay? Like, kung, for example, kung naimanguyab nimo or kung manguyab ka, the other person doesn't have to be a philosopher to think or to question kung unsay intention kung ano manguyab or kung ano sugton kani sa imong panguyaban, di ba? You have to look at the reasoning as to why manguyab ni siya sa imo. Okay? So kung manguyab lang siya nimo, then ikaw igo ra kagilkilig, there's something wrong with you. Okay? So a philosopher or someone thinks ang tao na maguna-una, una-una sa niya unsay rason nga manguyab ni siya. Ikaw po na manguyab, mangita dapat kay saktong rason nga manguyab ka. Okay? Dili nang manguyab lang ka abay guwapa. Dili po pwede sugton nimo ang musugot ka sa aning tawhana kay itsuraan or tugod na siya motor, tugod na siya car. Diba? That would be stupid. So a philosopher is someone who tries to avoid the stupidity of reasoning. Okay? Kung mali imong pagrason, then that is a stupid reason. Okay? Kung hunahuna kag tarong as to why a person does a certain thing, kung ano buhaton sa usa ka tao ang mga binuhatan niya, then imong itan-aw kung unsa joy ginahuna-huna niya. Okay? So basically, in the sense, philosophy is what happens when a practice becomes self-conscious. So what does this mean? Kung unsay ginabuhat nimo out of your passion, pinaagi sa unsay naandan nimo, basically kung unsay gina-practice nimo karon na batasan, ma-realize nimo ang mga moments na sakto man ang gibuhat. Basing mali akong gibuhat ba, basing mali akong una-una, basing mali akong intention nga nung kini nga kurso akong gikuha, basing lahi or basing mali ang gihuna-una nako para lang makaingon na i-graduate nako, di ba? So this is what philosophy asks of us. Kaya syempre, wala man ta sa kalibutan para lang trabaho. Di ba? There's more to life than your work or the work that will come to you. But of course, it is still necessary. Pero kung at the end of the day, magtrabaho ka, hindi ka lipay sa trabaho, ano trabaho ko mo? Di ba? So that is why we have to look into philosophy. Okay? So, after the Oxford definition, there is actually a problem with actually giving a definition to philosophy. Kaya ang philosophy man gud wala siya immediate or proper definition. Wala siya exact na definition. It is not like biology na study of life, dili siya physics na study of motion, things like that. Dili pud siya balao, dili pud siya mga human rights law na definite jud ang paghatag sa definition, di ba? Kaya ang philosophy manggod, it is rather dependent on who is the one talking. Okay, depende siya sa tao. Since ang tao, whether, o sa pod, ang pagsabot sa philosophy, whether pod. Okay? So, there are people who might agree with me with this definition kay, of course, since we can follow certain definitions now, pero we can also have what we call a working definition. So, ang working definition manggod, this is the definition in which we can set our foundation for us to actually start our discussions. Okay? Because at the end of the day, ang philosophy is more than just love of wisdom. Because you cannot just say love of wisdom na kung ikaw mismo wala kasabot sa gugma, wala po kasabot sa wisdom, hindi po na mo ma-explain ang philosophy. Di ba? Just like you cannot explain why you love your girlfriend if you don't understand nga ano ka nanguyab in the first place. Di ba? Or dili nimo masabtan nga ano importante imong kurso kung ikaw mismo dili nimo pili ang imong kurso. Okay? So for a working definition, at least not a foundation para masabtan nato kung sa discussion nato. Kaya at the end of the day, kung di nato ni sabton, dili gyapon ta mo ipasar. Tama ba? Okay? So, let our working definition be: philosophy is the study of all things naturally knowable to man's unaided powers, insomuch as they are studied in their deepest causes and reasons. Okay. Medyo complicated paminawon. Dapat ta. Kaya kung worth it siya sabton, dili jud siya dapat sayon. Okay? So, but let us make it easier, let us make it understandable. So, i-dissect sa nato ang definition nato, okay? So, unsay pasabot sa all things naturally knowable. So, when we say all things naturally knowable, muna yung mabutang na bahalag wala kay libro, masabtan na nimo. Okay? Okay. Excuse me. So, dili nimo kinahanglan makabalo na sa libro na ang adlaw mo rise. You don't need a book to tell you that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. You don't need a book to tell you that water is wet. You don't need a book to tell you that you are a human. Okay? So these are things na dali ra nimo ma-observe. Okay? So you, basically, in other words, yung nato naturally knowable mo yung mga butang na ma-observe nimo diretso kanang makit-an bitaw nimo dayon, di ba? So you don't need to know if it's summer by asking the calendar. Makita na nimo mga leaves sa mga trees o say reaction niya sa season, then you will know that it is summer or winter or fall or kung December na ba. Okay? So, you don't need a tool. Okay? You don't need, the only tool na kinahanglan nimo is your tools of observation. Okay? Kung masimhot nimo, kung makita nimo, matilawan nimo, mahikap nimo, then that is how, what we mean by naturally knowable. Makita na nimo siya and you will know na mauna ni siya. Okay? So, syempre, di man ka pwede maingon na makita kag iro, pero yung tao kay iring. Di ba? So, you know that this is a dog. And when you see a dog bite a human being, then mga tao na rin ka nga, gipaakman niya. So, then ma-realize niyo makawatan na ito siya. Diba? So, sense of observation. Natural na makabalo ka kung sa'yo mahitabo, base lang sa iyong observation. Okay? So, I hope that's clear. All things naturally knowable. Next would be man's unaided power. So, when you say man's unaided power, muna yung mga butang na dili. Diba, usually when you try to study organisms, mutanaw din ka using a microscope. Diba, mutanaw po microscope and you observe mga organisms na that are not immediately noticeable to the human eye. That is why I have a microscope. So, when you say man's naked powers, muna yung mga observation tools nimo. As I mentioned earlier, these are things that you use, or in other words, these are the senses. Muna yung mga senses na yung magamit sa lawas. Okay? So, if you have, you have the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, the sense of touch, and basically these are the things that are unaided. Okay? As opposed to what we call divine revelation, na gikan sa Ginoo, or observation gamit ang mga tools, bitaw mga technology. Okay? So these are things that man's unaided powers simply refers to. Okay, man's unaided powers simply refers to the understanding that ikaw as a person, you have the capability to understand certain concepts, certain realities sa kalibutan or sa environment mo. Okay? Then the next would be, what are causes and what are reasons? Okay. So basically, a cause is the origin of a certain reality. The reason, okay, a reason is the motivation for the cause of that reality. Okay? So, let's say for example, ang cause na mahulog ni siya is kay gibuhi man ako. But that is a cause. The reason that I dropped the pen is akong rason kay para mapakita ninyo. Diba? So, ang reason is more on the intention, the cause is on the action. Okay? So, in philosophy, we try to understand what is the cause and at the same time, what is the reason. Okay? So, the deepest cause for an event to happen was because something fell. Or siguro, for example, kung mag-landslide. So, what is the cause? The cause of it is that there was illegal logging. Okay? That is why na-landslide. Ang say rason, ano ga illegal logging? Because there are people who are greedy, or there are people who are poor, so they decided to be illegal loggers, and that because of that, this is what happened. Okay? Sige lang, we'll delve into that later on. So I hope we understand that. Okay? Ang cause is the action that made the reality happen. The reason is the intention as to why it was allowed to happen. Okay? That's what we mean by cause versus reason. That is what we mean by we have to study the deepest causes and reasons of certain realities of life. Alright? So with that, that is our definition of morality. If you didn't understand, you can go back to the video and pause a bit and read what we just discussed. Okay? So the next thing we have, what is the purpose of philosophy? Ang say pulos sa filosofiya, ang say rason nga kinahanglan pa man ako tunon kung dili man gyapon ni nako magamit. But okay, so ang common assumption man jud is dili magamit sa uban, but then again, the way you live your life is a philosophy in itself. Okay? So philosophy by virtue of its definition is what makes human beings what they are. Kung kinsa ang tao, dira nimo makitaan kung unsay filosofiya sa tao, dira nimo makitaan unsay kinaiyan niya. Okay? It is through philosophy, it is through what they believe in that you see what kind of person they are. Okay? So, yeah. So every individual, regardless of race, religion, cultural group, or interest wants to understand the purpose of everything around them. By virtue of that, each individual inquires why things are as they are. Okay? So, bahalag Bisaya ka, Maranao ka, Tagalog ka, Kristiyano ka, Muslim, Hindu, Budyo, you will always ask as to why ingani ang kalibutan nimo. Ngano ingani gahitabo sa imong palibot. Okay? So we tend to ask, why is there a pandemic? Why is there why are there government officials who do not seem to care about their constituents? Why is it that there are citizens who are so selfish that even though the medical professionals ask us to stay at home, we still choose to go out because we want to drink, because we want to have fun. Okay? Why are people selfish? Things like that. So regardless kung unsay gituuhan ninyo, nadri tao nga selfish, nadri tao nga tarong, things like that. And it's dependent on the person's or the individual's belief system. And that belief system is linked to how they see the world. Diba? Kung ang imong pananto sa kalibutan kay igura ka magpa-happy-happy, then there is no question as to why you are selfish. If you think that, if you believe that you belong to this world and that you have to fulfill your obligations, your duties, then there is no question as to why dili ka labad, diba? So basically, that is our main purpose in philosophy. We have to understand unsay kanindot or unsay ka ano dako kay problema. Okay, dili man siguro sa problema, no? Pero the purpose of philosophy is to understand in order for us to make ourselves better, diba? Okay, if you are not aware sa imong kagalingon, how can you say na maayo ka sa kabutang? Well, you cannot just say that you are a good person. You cannot assume that you're a good person by but the way you treat other people is contrary to that of a good person, diba? So basically, yun, the purpose of philosophy, to understand the reasoning behind everything we do, para masabtan nato unsa joy hidden reason nga no gibuhat nimo ako sa kabutang. Okay? Gabuhat bagag maayo para lang magpasikat, or gabuhat kag maayo kay kabalo ka na maayo ni siya buhaton. Okay? So things like that. Okay? What then is a philosophy of man? Okay, so since our course description is philosophy of man or philosophy of the human person, so ang point ani na course or this course aims to study the philosophical inquiry of individuals throughout history. How the method of inquiry, despite being relatively the same, is unique to its place in history. Okay, so philosophy didn't start how do we say this? Philosophy started simply as a belief in a greater cosmic order or a greater phenomenon, or in other words, the understanding philosophy kay naay dako nga there's a bigger picture in everything that we do. Okay, so that's basically how the concept of gods and goddesses arrived. Okay, before there was an atheism, regardless, there's always some sort of atheism in history. But the point here is, it all started with questioning as to why does it rain? Why does the sun rise in the east and not the west? Why does this happen? Why does that happen? And so people in the ancient times assumed that siguro na ay mga being sa taas na mauna control sa mga palibot nato. Okay, so naay Diyos para sa mga animals, may Diyos para sa yuta, may Diyos para sa nature, things like that. So it all started with that method of questioning. And throughout history, from that moment in time, there then came the concept of one God, and later on the concept that there's no God, and then the concept that man created God, things like that. But of course, we are people who believe, no? And we will look into these concepts, no? Bahala dili ta mo agree. This is just for the sake of discussion lang po, okay? Of course, we are not limited to our space in time. Diba? Kung ahata karon, dili ta limited kung ahata karon. Okay? I hope you try to get what I'm trying to say. I hope you get what I'm trying to say. But the thing is, at the end of it, if we look at the bigger picture in human history, which we are always a part of, regardless of the time and the space, the way people thought 3,000 years ago is different from how people, the train of thought 50 years ago, or the present time. Okay? So, we have to look into how the concepts and the principles we have now as a race were developed throughout the history ever since recorded history. Okay? Because not all history is recorded. So the earliest known records of philosophy were found in ancient Greece and likewise ancient China. Okay? But then again, these were times that were so complex that we in the modern times cannot fully understand. But then again, because of what they left for us, how we think now was shaped by how they thought. Okay? There's a dog. Anyway, so ayun. So the philosophy of man is actually looking into how people thought in the past until how they are thinking now. Okay? Because, again, how the past influenced our present is a vital clue as to how we should behave as human beings towards our fellow human beings. Okay? Kasi syempre, sometimes the way we think affects other people, which is why we are not aware that the way we think ends up harming another person instead of doing good. That is why we can say that there are people who are selfish. That is why we can say that there are people who are bad. But then again, how we think is dependent on how we were raised, and how we were raised is dependent on how our parents were raised, and so on and so forth. Diba? It goes on, and then we there see that they think like this because nga niya ang huna-huna sa atong panahon na. And we think like this because at this moment in time, we are thinking a bit differently from how the past thought. Alright? So, yun, it's an inquiry, mangutana ta kung unsa gyud hunahuna sa unang panahon. Okay? Right. So there are different eras of philosophy which we will look into throughout the 4 terms of our first semester of this pandemic academic year. Okay, first and foremost, we will look into ancient philosophy, followed by medieval philosophy, modern philosophy, and lastly, contemporary philosophy. Alright? So, ancient philosophy divided into 3 eras: the pre-Socratic era, the Socratic era, and the post-Socratic era. Okay? So, the main focus of this, of course, is how people thought before the time of Socrates, how people thought during the era of Socrates, and how people thought after Socrates died. Alright? So, the main person that is of interest in the ancient world or ancient philosophy is the ancient Greek philosopher known as Socrates. Alright? But then we will discuss him later on. Okay? Okay. For your first, this wasn't edited. Okay, so for your first assignment, which will serve as your notes, okay, please research the 12 pre-Socratic philosophers. Okay. Ibutang lang siya sa Microsoft Word. At the same time, ayaw lang siya i-send. Okay, ayaw siya i-send. I'll give further instructions later on. But, first and foremost, and makita na rin siya sa internet, so don't worry. Search the 12 pre-Socratic philosophers, okay? And try to understand what they believe in. Okay? Alright, so then, ayun. That will be our main discussion for the next video. Alright? So again, please research on the pre-Socratic philosophers. Look into what they had in common and what they differed from, and why they believe in what they believe. Okay, so with that, we end our first video class, our video lesson. So I hope you are safe. Take care. God bless. And I'll see you in the next video.